Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of the Life Vision Lab podcast, the space where we explore fresh ways to gain clarity, align with purpose, and transform how we live and lead. I am your host, Shwetha, and I'm excited to begin this next episode. In our last episode with Andrea, we explored how healing and self awareness can open the door to a more aligned life. Today, we're going to go deeper into a subject that touches every one of us: grief. When we hear the word grief, most of us think of death or divorce, but grief also lives quietly in the background of everyday transitions. Leaving a job, moving cities, ending friendships, or letting go of the old version of ourselves as we step into the new. Andrea will help us understand how grief impacts not only our emotions, but also our nervous system and how we can recognize when we need support. We'll also talk about the more obvious forms of grief, which is sudden loss, death at a young age, or divorce, and how to navigate the shock and trauma that can come with them. This conversation is about naming what we feel, normalizing our experience, and learning practical tools to move through grief with compassion. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let's dive in. Andrea, welcome back. Super excited to have you back on Life Vision Lab podcast for our second episode. In our previous episode, as I mentioned, we explored self awareness and healing. As a continuation, I'd like our listeners to understand how grief shows up beyond just bereavement. So, walk me through what you do in this space and help explain this a little bit more.
Thank you so much for having me back, Shwetha. It's really, really lovely to be with you. I really love this topic, even though, yes, of course, it's a challenging one. The reason I love it so much is because grief is a portal into the next version of ourselves or into the next chapter of our lives, depending on what we are grieving. It's a natural, healthy process. It's not a disease, it's not a disorder. Grieving is something that we are all built to do. Just the same way that our immune system knows how to fight the flu, our grieving process knows how to get us back to a state of balance. So there's grief, and then there's traumatic grief. Grief can show up in all kinds of different ways. The one we think of the most is having strong emotions, maybe crying, maybe being really angry. But it can also show up in our bodies, like feeling really tired or having low immunity or chronic inflammation, being more susceptible to illness, foggy brain or fatigue, anxiety, sometimes panic.
So, how would you define grief in a way that includes, and I know you said there's traumatic grief and then there's normal grief. How can you tell the difference between the two? Because grief is grief to me, and most often I relate grief to big life events, but I've slowly started noticing like leaving a job, separating from certain groups of friends, like leaving countries, as an example, because I've experienced that. Those also have some deep impacts on us, and grief is definitely one of them. So, what are the stages so people can understand how to identify it and then how to work through it? And I want you to expand it for both the traumatic grief as well as normal grief.
Yeah, so you're right that grief will most likely be a response to any major life change. Grief helps us move from one reality to the next. The reason that we grieve typically is because we need to undo some kind of structure, some kind of reality, some kind of identity in order to create the new version or the new identity or the new reality, essentially. And in that process, from one stage to the next, we get to uncover what's really important to us, what we want to take forward. What qualities of ourselves do we want to take forward? Leaving your country and moving to a new home, what rituals, what traditions that you bring forward into the new experience. Or if a loved one has died, right? What teachings did they give you? What inspiration did they bring up in you that you want to bring forward? That deconstruction and then recreation process, grief takes you from one moment to the next. It helps you tune into what's important to you. That's really the function of grief. And then on the other side of that coin is it helps you to know what you want to let go of and what you want to say goodbye to. What needs release, what needs surrender, what needs letting go of. Grieving is a functional, adaptive thing to experience. Traumatic grief is really an experience where the trauma of something has overshadowed the natural grieving process because there was something that was too big, too much to process at the time. So unfortunately, when we lose loved ones to an accident or to suicide, even aspects of relationships falling apart. So lots of different reasons why we might experience traumatic grief. But the issue there is that the trauma almost becomes like a cloud or a blanket, difficult to access the vulnerable feelings underneath that need to be heard, gives the nervous system and the mind an opportunity to release some of that shock, some of the grieving to take place in a safe environment with care and tenderness.
Do you think we have, because we've never been taught what it means to grieve, what it means to process grief, is that one of the reasons why we find it so difficult to articulate when we're going through grief?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is true. I think we live in a society that doesn't exactly welcome grief as an experience. We're not very comfortable with big emotions, I would say, on the whole. And we live in isolated lives in some ways. So we're not all that comfortable with grief. And we don't often feel very comfortable when somebody else is grieving around us, right? It's hard to show up for grief. Even positive
Mhm.
change can bring about feelings of grief. Turning our awareness to that reality that grief comes with any shift hopefully can normalize it a little bit more in our own system and then noticing it in the people around us and just making space for it.
I want to unpack that a little bit about how we can make space. But
Mhm.
before that, I want to really understand what grief means
Mm.
as a word. Is it that our nervous system is used to something and now it's not there anymore? So it's a security that's gone. It's the known that's
Mhm.
gone. And that shift basically brings that emotion of grief. Am I right?
Yeah, I like the way you phrase that. There's a familiarity with the current, right? And then when change happens, emotions come up for all different kinds of reasons. Grief is the process of moving from one stage to another. We know the Love Kubler-Ross talked about 4 stages, 4 or 5. I'm forgetting off the top of my head because I'm not. There's another one.
I thought there were seven
Well, there's
stages of
added since.
grief.
Yes, we talk about
Yes.
anger, we talk about bargaining, denial, and moving all the way to acceptance
Mhm.
and then making meaning.
Mhm.
All of those stages are valid and part of the process. Everyone is unique. And whatever emotions arise for an
Mm.
individual, I don't like to put people in boxes or processes that other people may not experience. Really being in touch with your own emotional process is really all it takes.
I've seen people who've gone through some big
Mhm.
grief, the traumatic grief, where they've lost a
Mhm.
loved one and they've gone through divorce, who reacted very differently. So, again, is it
Mhm.
just how the nervous system reacts to that shift in reality? As an
Mhm.
example, I know someone who lost a loved one, but she seemed perfectly fine for the first
Mhm.
1 year when that happened, almost speaking like the person was alive and constantly laughing, thinking about memories of that person. People around her would be like, "Are you
Mhm.
okay? You've really lost someone so important, but you don't seem to be expressing emotions, crying, which is the natural thing we think
Mhm.
about, right? So, why is she not crying? Why is she not being quiet about it? How is she laughing? How is she so okay? I know individuals who've gone through divorce or moving different countries or gone through something big in their family, in their life, where they just shut
Mhm.
down. They cut
Mhm.
people off. They don't really want to speak about it.
Yep.
So, as a society, how do we make it more
Mhm.
supportive when we don't understand how each person
Mhm.
processes grief? How do we be more curious and ask the right questions when someone's going through some life changing event that we know resulted in grief?
Great question and great examples. You never really know how somebody's going to respond. I think you said it, which is it's about being curious, right? When you're in a posture of curiosity, when you're with somebody that you care about, maybe be mindful of the curiosity is not coming from a place of why are you this or that, because that might feel a little bit judgmental to the person that you're trying to connect with, where your curiosity is born from, right? Open questions like, what is this like for you? What comes to mind when you think about home or your lost loved one, or what goes through your mind, like what are you thinking about these days in relation to XYZ? Just asking open-ended questions so that they can really give you their own experience, because to your point, and like we're talking about, not everybody is the same, and there is no one way to grieve. Grief is its own journey, and it's very unique and personal.
I think there are stages, as you said. This is something I've always been curious about. Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? Is it a lifetime? Is it that your nervous system, like you said in the first episode, you just have to let your nervous system come to integrate with the experience and come to terms with it? I guess you'll carry it through your life, but you just have learned to live with it.
That's a great question. The reason it's hard to answer is because there is no one answer. I think you're asking, how do you know if there's like something to be processed or worked on in terms of grief versus just living with grief? And I guess I would
Right.
say, from the work that I do with my clients, anytime you give grief, for example, or trauma, of course, a safe place to be really seen and heard, whether that's with a therapist or with a caring friend, something shifts on its own. Because our grief is heard and seen and accepted, not tried to change, then the natural sort of process, when I'm using the word process, processing takes place. We get to actually experience our internal world while allowing it to move and be expressed without trying to change it, without judging it. And then things automatically start to shift because you get to witness your own internal experience as a result of that connection or that conversation that you're having where you feel safe to do. It is a hard thing to know, right? Is there processing needed? Does the grief just go on its own? I think a lot of people who do live with grief might say that you never really stop, obviously, loving or missing your lost loved one, for example. But your relationship with that person can shift significantly through the grieving process. So I do EMDR, which I talked about in the last episode about that particular modality of therapy, whether it's with grief or whether it's with traumatic grief. Things start to shift for people because the painful, the part that's hurting, the part that feels sad, the part that feels uncertain, the part that feels alone, that those emotions of that person get to have a conversation with the adaptive parts. I'm pointing to my forehead because our prefrontal cortex is up here. All of our adaptive, wise thinking brain is up here. So when those parts get to talk, right, in that therapy, automatically things start to shift, and usually for the better. Have EMDR because they're grieving? No. If you have a traumatic grief, I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it because nobody needs to move through that by themselves.
I think that helps us understand how therapy can really help process grief, and also how we as a collective can support individuals going through grief. I think some people don't know how to express it, how to ask for support and help, and actually even understand that they're going through grief themselves. Denial. That's a classic stage of grief where I'm perfectly fine, everything is okay. But I think as a collective, we need to be more curious and not judgmental and not say, I expected you to react this way, but this is not how you're reacting. What's going on? Which puts more pressure on them, obviously, because there's no one way to grieve. There are different ways. But why is talking about grief so important? For me, this episode was really important to record with you, Andrea, because it's not just from an emotional perspective, but also from a public health perspective. Avoiding grief, bottling it up, it can have so many measurable negative impacts on mental health, physical health, relationships, mortality. A lot of people can't handle grief and it leads them to commit suicide and take their own lives. Unresolved grief can lead to so many challenges in our society. You also have complicated grief, which is prolonged grief disorder. It affects about 7 to 10% of bereaved people, but can be higher in traumatic or sudden loss situations. People with complicated grief are 4 times more likely to suffer from depression and 6 times more to have PTSD. Where I want our listeners, if they can take back anything today from this episode, Andrea, how can they find tools, self-help tools to deal with grief, or even to identify that they need support and help?
Thanks for painting that picture. It's such an important thing for us to be aware of. I would say to folks who are dealing with complicated grief or unprocessed grief is I understand the desire to just keep going, to keep it manageable makes sense, especially if parent with little kids or you have to take care of elderly parents or whatever, just live your life. It takes courage to just pause and ask yourself, what am I really experiencing here? Last episode, we were talking about energy. And so, and unprocessed grief essentially are like a vortex that take your life force energy because there's so much fear associated with what the person is afraid is going to come up. I worked with a woman recently, her daughter committed suicide, and it took her a while to come work with me, understandably, because she was so terrified that was going to come up. But here's the thing that I said to her that helped her find her courage, which is all of that stuff is already there. It's already in your system, it's already in your body. So, of course, it's scary to sit with those feelings or to witness them or to feel them. And there's wisdom in not wanting to be re-traumatized. That's probably the number one reason that people don't come to therapy. They're afraid of being re-traumatized. That makes sense. However, a trained therapist who does the kind of work that they should be doing, if they know what they're doing, they're not going to allow that to happen. They're not going to allow you to be re-traumatized. Feel strong emotions, yes. Notice difficult discomfort in your body, yes, but in a tolerable, safe environment. That's what allows all of that to move. So does that take a certain amount of like radical action on the part of the person grieving? Yes, it's no small thing. But the not doing that, to your point, Shwetha, is your health, potentially your relationships, potentially even your life. I urge anybody who is carrying that weight to really reach out, explore options about how they can start to get that moving. If you're really somebody who's not ready to talk or to go into a room with a therapist, it could be really scary at first. You'll soon find it's not why people are scared. Start to do some body work, do some yoga, do some Tai Chi, find some kind of physical outlet that at least starts to get your energy moving and your breath opening. We know from Chinese medicine that grief is held in the lungs, but so is acceptance because everything we live on a duality planet. The law of polarity is always in action. So where there is light, there is dark. Where there is up, there is down. So where there is grief, in that same breath, literally, there is also the possibility to access acceptance. One more thing I want to say for folks who are scared because they think that it means they're going to let go of their person forever, or because they're afraid that it means they don't love their person if they stop hurting about it, the person who's died, or some reason they feel attached to their suffering. I can tell you that you process your grief once you give yourself an opportunity to feel those feelings in a safe environment. You're with your loved one, it's going to get deeper. It's not because a lot of times we are blocking our heart with our grief as an armor. And what that does is it actually keeps us from accessing our natural ability to receive messages of love from that person. So you can get as literal about that or as esoteric as you, but whether in memories, or being able to, use prayer or meditation or whatever your tools are. Um, know being grief and moving through it is only going to take you closer to your lost loved one. I've seen it time and time again. Something I want to share with your listeners about the power of the emotion of sadness. So you were asking me, Shwetha, about what exactly is grief. And grief is any and all experience in relation to change. But I think at the heart of it, at the root of grief, is really sadness. Sadness to do with
Mm,
separation. Separation from our loved one, separation from our home, separation from who we used to be, the sadness associated with separation. And the reason I think that's the hardest emotion to sit with when it comes to grief is because it reminds us of the original wound of coming into our physical bodies, moving away from source, away. Of course, it's an illusion, but it's a felt experience, right? Being in a separate body, coming into this life. That's my belief system. And so I believe that it reminds us of that original deep wound of the fear of being separate from source, from universe, from connection, however you want to relate to that. But at the same time, because of going back to that law of polarity, where you have one, you have access to the other polarity, the opposite, where you have sadness and separation is exactly the same point, the same place where you have access to profound connection, to oneness. That's why grief to me is a portal. It's a portal through the illusion of separation and into the truth of connection, how everyone is always connected. We are all connected, whether we are in our physical bodies or not, because we are connected on a soul level. We are always connected to source.
mm,
We are connected to the life breath,
mhm,
right? The thing that moves us, that breathes us. So I think grief is the most powerful healing experience we can have if we let it be.
mm. That's really deep, the explanation that you gave, Andrea. Thank you. And it does, I think, help people understand that if they're navigating through grief, what that means, right? There are some people who go through it without realizing they're actually grieving. And then it manifests in different ways, like physical ailments. And that to me is information where you said grief is stored in the lungs area, which is why it makes sense that bereaved individuals have increased risk of heart problems. You get chronic illnesses. But is this why, Andrea, you do the work you do with people who deal with grief? Because there's another interesting thing you said, which I want to unpack later in the episode, is the more you heal, the more you open your heart up, the more you can connect with the loved one you lost. So I want to unpack that because I am a bit of a skeptic. You can definitely convert me if there's evidence and there's scientific evidence, there's data. I'm all for it. I do want to talk a little bit because I know there are people who question it time and time again. There's a lot of research coming out now too that it is valid, it is true. What would you say is the space you give your clients? Is it a support group? Do they get to work with you one on one? How best can people, when they get in touch with you, what's the kind of support they
Yeah,
can
perfect.
expect?
Thank you for asking that. I'm going to answer that question, then I'll give you a personal experience of how grief has manifested and how I moved through it, because it helps people make sense of this information. So, first of all, there are
Mm-hmm.
two main ways that I work with people around grief. Number one is in my private practice, so one on one therapy. I eh, assess with that person what it is that they're looking for, what are they going through. And as I said in the last episode, what do they want a bigger experience of, right? What's important to them? And then we create a plan together about how we're going to move through that experience or those challenges in a way that is comfortable to them, in a way that gives them a place to tell their story. Also, using the techniques that I use helps to activate both sides of the brain. I'm talking about EMDR, and helps that person digest some challenging emotional experiences in a safe way. That usually looks like a 4 to 6 session container, depending on the person. And so we move through grief personally that way. The other way that I help people move through grief is through teaching Kundalini yoga. So I have some courses online, and I also teach people can experience that yoga and that breath work in a way that helps to move some of that energy and really helps the whole mind body system make adjustments that are adaptive to them personally. And there's some beautiful meditations in that practice, in that lineage. There are compassion meditations specifically, which I think we talked about last time, where there's an actual experience of compassion and a certain part of the brain that lights up. There are meditations are specifically designed to release grief from the whole system, but in particular the lungs. So there's a lot of powerful tools that we have in that practice that help people alchemize stuck and hidden grief. Let me tell you a little personal story. So I grew up in a house, a loving home, a family that was a blended family. My mother had our first marriage. That marriage produced two children, my half siblings. And then that marriage dissolved. And my mother she did an amazing job as a single mom, finding a job for herself, getting herself set up with two kids, two little kids. And later on, she met my dad, and they had me, and we became a family of five and a dog. And it was a great home to grow up in. At that time, however, there was not a lot of education or mainstream knowledge about how to support kids who have had some wound or grieving situation, right? So here are my siblings whose father essentially disappeared from their life. He didn't die, but he just wasn't a picture anymore. And my mom was not in a position, she didn't really have the resources to process that with the kids, right? So when I came scene, and I'm a highly sensitive person, which means I have a highly sensitive nervous system, I was very aware that there was something up in this household that I was born into. Lots of great things, lots of one, but also something that just felt off to my nervous system.
Didn't feel right.
Even in my work, in my own personal therapy work, I've done processing that has brought me back to memories of being a baby and remember having that feeling in my body that I know that I think things are okay, but they're not okay. Something's amiss. Somebody's hurting. Somebody's hurting. By the time I was 8 years old, I had a diagnosis of asthma, which is a lung disorder. By my 20s, I had a diagnosis of psoriatic arthritis, which is an inflammatory autoimmune issue. So now I had two autoimmune issues. Later on in my 30s, after the birth of my son, I was propelled into a deep healing journey and sought out a trauma therapist, somebody who did mind body work, who happened to do EMDR, which is now my favorite tool. It's that journey with her that I uncovered the level of unprocessed grief I had just pulled into my system that wasn't even mine, both in my immediate family of five, but then also, of course, I learned intergenerationally as well. So fast forward to a few years of doing that work, along with adding Kundalini yoga and working with a naturopath.
Because you're a highly sensitive person, you absorb that energy that you see around you. And then what happens? Alchemizes into either negative or a positive. If you know how to process it well, then a positive experience. Can you unpack that a little bit for me and the listeners?
You mean, how does one process that information?
You absorbed a lot of their unresolved grief because it's all energy, end of the day. It's all the way we communicate with each other. We're all connected, as you said. How can they get more aware of it to then alchemize it into something more positive and protect their own nervous system?
For me, working with that therapist and the way, I guess I'll get a little deeper. So we started with the chronic pain aspect. But oftentimes it's not the problem that's the problem. It's the way we're relating to the problem that's the problem. For example, physical pain and inflammation. Without realizing it, you have a relationship with your physical pain. In other words, physical pain brings up certain emotions in you, certain thoughts, and certain beliefs about yourself. And when you start to unpack what those are, you start to realize where you've been disempowering yourself, where you've been caught in a loop of lack or not enoughness. So, for example, when I've had swollen joints, right, I felt vulnerable. I felt scared. I felt helpless. I felt betrayed by my body. I felt out of control. Those are things that oftentimes people feel alongside grief, right? Grief can make you feel all of those things. So when I worked through that, when I realized the way that my psyche was responding to my body, and though my body was just trying to give me a mirror, it was just trying to give me information of something that hurts, I was able to realize that I could respond differently to my physical pain. It didn't have to mean that I was helpless.
Mm,
It didn't have to mean that there was something wrong with me or that my body was broken, which is how it feels at first.
mhm,
And once I
mhm, mhm,
realized that the way what I was projecting onto my own body as though it was broken, what that thought wasn't even mine. That was somebody else's that I had downloaded in my environment. Our brain downloads thoughts and then we think they're our own. This idea of I'm broken, right? I bet you can surmise that there might be somebody in my life who maybe thought because something painful happened, there was something wrong with her. Of course, you see what I
mm.
mean? So we take on these thought forms and then they
Yeah.
manifest in our physical bodies or in our behaviors, right? So
Mm,
once I started to realize, oh, this is the information, it's like I'm excavating the information my body's giving me, what my beliefs are, what my thoughts are, what the emotions are. And then once I was able to do that, then they could move on their own. And eventually I reached a place where I didn't just I always cognitively knew that my heal and I cognitively knew there was nothing wrong. What,
mm,
but through this work, it's like you can get other parts of you to catch up with yourself. And then
You can flip that switch where your body also works with your cognitive
exactly. And
mind.
so it became a felt sense that I'm well and I'm
Mm,
healthy and there's just something that might work
mm,
out, right? A
mhm,
sense that there's nothing wrong with me. This body was given to
mm,
source. Like, how could there be anything wrong with?
mm,
Yes, maybe it needs some help through
mm,
something, or maybe I'm not saying it shouldn't feel pain, but I'm saying suddenly I could
mhm.
break free of the illusion that I was stuck in this place of suffering. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about processing and alchemizing. It's taking a negative experience and working through it so it can become a positive experience, but not jumping ahead and just trying to do it with your mind because it's not enough to just have.
This is what affirmations are basically, right? You're trying to force an outcome through affirmations, but they say if you don't feel it, no matter how many times you keep saying an affirmation, it's never going to
Well, an
work.
affirmation, it's just realizing its limitation. I love affirmations. And I invite you bilateral tapping. Anybody can do this right now. I'm tapping right, left, left on my shoulders. If you did affirmations while doing bilateral tapping, you're going to have a very different experience
Mm,
because you're turning on both sides of
mm,
your brain. You're getting your body involved. So let's say you started today and looked in the mirror and you were like, I'm beautiful, but you don't feel that at all, right? If you add tapping and
mm,
do it again and again, your body is processing information. Do you see the difference between just saying something with
mm,
words versus involving the whole body and helping it move? You might feel disgusted at first when you do that, but that's okay because that's
mm.
information that your body is trying to release and move. Yeah.
You're including a sensory exercise now. So the body is like, okay, it's not just the mind. I got to catch up through the tapping. And then you integrate that into your entire system. So you feel the
Yeah.
affirmation too. That's a
Yeah.
great tip.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Andrea. That's so good. I'm going to do that every morning. I am
Yes.
safe. I am
Yes.
awesome. I am
Yes.
enough.
Yes. You see those videos of little kids with their parents doing their hair and saying the affirmation? The parent is playing the comforting, supportive role there, right? The parent is really setting the
Mm,
stage for that kid to be able to say those words and believe it in their body because it's like, look, mom believes it,
mm,
dad believes it, I believe it too. But for most adults, we don't tend to have that. So when you get the body involved, it's like you're substituting that parent, getting that stable um, physical presence that allows you to find more courage.
so beautiful. And that takes me to the next question I have for you. And I've been through some situations where I've experienced deep grief, which again made no sense for what happened. So it wasn't really big trauma kind of grief, other than, of course, losing my maternal grandmother, which even to date, I feel her presence, so I know what you're talking about. Sometimes when I have processed grief, it could be changing in the dynamic of my relationship with my husband, changing in jobs. I have craved this presence of someone to just come and hold me and I curl up. I've noticed that's a very common feeling for me when I go through grief. I just want to be held and I want to be curled up. So I think that's a strong indication too, right? That's your inner child basically saying, I want to be held. You got to start building your awareness on how you process grief to then seek that specific support that works for you. Most often, I'm like, nobody needs to talk. When I'm going through this whole process, I don't need solutions. I don't need affirmations. At that point, I just want to be held, right? And I just completely shrivel up. And what is that though, Andrea? Why does the body completely shrivel up and just want to kind of disappear into this little ball?
That pulls on my heartstrings when I hear you say that. I thank you for being vulnerable and saying that. We all have our child parts in us. We are a product of all of the different ages we've ever been. That child part is very much in you. She lives in you, in your physical body, right? Same way your teenager does. I love that you have this awareness, and it's an invitation for a little bit of self psychology for anybody listening. What are they saying to you? And can you allow also yourself, the way you are right now, Shwetha, to actually listen to the need underneath that? Back to the problem isn't the problem, it's how we're relating to the problem that's the problem. We have we have human needs to be touched, to be seen, to be heard, to be validated, to be soothed. And we just deny those basic needs. And a lot of times it's because we're afraid that we can't actually get those needs met. So, quote unquote, what's the point of having those needs? But the acknowledgement of the need to yourself is often powerful enough to soothe that feeling. And then, of course, there's always havening, which is something called havening, which I'm rubbing my arms right now. This is a lovely self soothing mechanism. I'm just rubbing my hands down the back of my arms. This is a lovely self soothing mechanism that you can do anytime. The tapping back and forth will help regulate you, will help comfort you. And then, of course, you can do whatever you want. You can put on your fuzzy PJs, you can call in your husband if you have one. Say, get over here, I need a hug. Just do what you have to do to make yourself feel better, and that's okay.
You reminded me. That's the reason I brought it up, Andrea. For me, I'm lucky that I have a community around me, my husband, my child, who can give me that hug when I need it, when I'm back home, my sister, my parents. But for those who don't have anyone right next to them when they're grieving, I was going to ask you what are the tools, and you went ahead and explained it. So that's great. Thank you. Because again, we sometimes feel so alone in this world, and I need people to know, which I learned through my own healing journey, that you're never alone, right? You have yourself. But we need to know how we can be these different things to ourselves through these tools that we can
Yeah,
learn.
well said.
And so finally, then, Andrea, when you say that connection is important, touch is important, I'm thinking this is why 1 in 14 children will experience a death of a parent, but that turns into anger, that turns into behavioral issues, that turns into mental health problems, etc., where they don't know how to navigate and process that grief. Touch is so important, and I think the tools you provided, if you don't have people right next to you, tapping,
Havening,
havening, you said?
Havening, havening,
Haven.
grace. Oh my God, yeah, for sure. Slow, deep breath. Placing a
Mm-hmm.
hand on the heart and a hand on the belly helps to
Mm-hmm.
center and
Mm-hmm.
ground the body. And then taking slow exhales will never steer you wrong, no matter what age you are, no matter what you're going
Mm-hmm.
through, whether it's trauma or grief. Just remembering that your breaths and your hands on your own body can be very soothing and very comforting. When you talk about
Mm-hmm.
kids losing parents or going through grieving, thank you for bringing that up, honestly, because we do need to remember that kids grieve no matter what age they are. They grieve moving from one grade to another. They grieve the loss of friendships. They grieve for any and all things that you and I would grieve for, right? And just
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging it and naming it and letting it happen, explaining to them that It's okay to feel lots of emotions in response to life. And that is actually a healthy thing as long as you're not hurting anybody or anything. That's a behavior. The emotions are completely welcome and valid. And if your teenager or your child is having a hard time knowing what to do with those emotions, the number one thing you can do as a parent is check your own emotions. A lot of times when they're riled up or on a certain frequency, we tend to match them. And then that's where trouble ensues. And it's very natural. Parenting is hard. But if you can remain calm, if you can do the deep breath as a parent, if you can model the havening or the tapping, even if it looks a little bit weird to that teenager at first, over time, you're planting a seed that there's a way through the grief. You don't have to deny it, ignore it. You don't have to lash out at somebody. You don't have to hurt somebody or yourself. You can tolerate pain, even though it's very scary. As an adult, modeling that we can handle big emotion is really one of the best gifts you can give your kid. And helping them to name that emotion or just name that they're stressed, even is, and that's okay, is hugely healing for them. If your child is open to hugs, you always ask, but if they are, try to hold them and let them go first. Really just the optimal hug is at least 30 seconds. After 30 seconds, you start to get oxytocin release. So this is great for couples too. If you can teach your partner that the 30-second hug is a powerful bonding technique, or with your kid, if they're willing to, let them choose, is when you start to get that bonding hormone really happening, and then the nervous system relaxes. So in our house, we call it a 30-second hug. If I need one, I say, can I get a 30-second hug? Anybody? For that reason, because everybody knows.
That's, oh my God, you're giving such amazing tools and tips and tricks today. This is great. I want to thank you, Andrea, and move into the last part of this episode where I want to unpack the topic around connecting with your loved one after they pass. This to me is a topic I've been wanting to explore, a little bit scared, a little bit skeptical, right? Am I imagining? Am I crazy? Are the normal questions I ask myself, because as I mentioned earlier in the episode, I lost my maternal grandmom at early 2018. And I was so blessed and lucky that we planned our trip and I could be with her 20 days before her passing. So we came back and she passed away within 20 days of my son and I returning to Canada. Ever since then, the first year was me just couldn't accept she no longer is in the 3D world. I would still talk about her like she's alive. I would still imagine that she's in the home where she lives with my aunt and my mom, that she's walking around. Like to me, I just couldn't accept she's no longer alive. And she was such a vibrant woman. She lost her husband at a very young age, but the way she led her life, and a lot of my courage, I think, comes from her. Slowly, the second and the third year, after her passing, it started to sink in that this is real. She's no longer there. The more I went back home, I wouldn't see her. It just felt more real. But I felt her presence and I still feel her presence. Sometimes when I'm seeking support or clarification, most often it's like I'm just so exhausted. I had a very difficult day and I'm just staring into space on my bed. I can feel her presence in the corner of my bed. And the immediate reaction, Andrea, is like, you're crazy. You're losing it. So that is why, for me, this topic is so important. And I want to cover with you because I know you work with people to build that relationship, even as they're going through the process and walking towards their last days, right, in the 3D world. So, walk me through your process, Andrea, in the best way you can. And what do you do? How do you support? And what makes you say that you can actually access
Connection.
the connection, thank you, to the person who's passed on and is no longer in this 3D world?
Up until recently, the field of psychology was under the impression that in order for somebody to be able to resolve grief, accept it and be sad, that's fine, but deal with the facts. that was only partly true. We now know that people do better when they have some kind of new formed relationship with their loved one who's passed. And that could mean many different things. It could mean like you feel, like you said, their person is in the room right here, right now, and I'm talking to them. It could also just be I maintain a relationship through my memories of that person. But the point is, we know better now, which is that people do better when they have some kind of continued relationship, changed relationship, but a continued relationship with loved ones who have passed. And in another, I'll think about somebody who maybe had, an abusive parent who's passed. The person who sits in front of me, my client, if that's their case, even they benefit from healing that relationship, because it's that person who's sitting in front of me that still carries around potentially, resentment or guilt or rage or whatever is unresolved. So at the very least, the relationship continues because somebody is still here experiencing the relationship, even if the other person is not. But the work that I do with people, I'll give you a couple of things that I've witnessed in the work that I do with people. As part of the grief work that I do induced after death communication therapy, which is essentially a branch of EMDR therapy for people who are grieving, primarily resolution approach. Okay. Now, is unique about this approach is that it really helps a person navigate through their grief by focusing in on sadness. I was talking about sadness before. Not to say that other emotions aren't valid, they're very valid and they're very welcome. But this particular grief therapy approach really focuses on being with, without trying to change, sadness. And the more I do this work, the more that I see that as people can safely and comfortably be with their sadness, new information starts to emerge. And I'm just going to speak openly here about what my theory as to what's happening. I think two things happen when we do this. Number one is I think the heart space starts to open because sadness lives in here with love, in my opinion. I think it's in the heart space. So as the heart starts to open, so as my spiritual teacher has taught me, our heart is actually the receiver of information and of beyond. So our intuition, for example, but also literal messages from spirit are received from the heart. The heart is the receiver. The mind is the processor. So I believe that the heart is opening and that we're able to then access its true ability, which is to be a receiver. I also believe that as we do EMDR and we move the eyes back and forth, we're accessing something called the pineal and the pituitary glands, which are associated with what we call our third eye. They're glands that live in our head that are called the master glands. So this is a yogic teaching. They essentially create hormones and peptides that affect the whole rest of the body. So I'm of the belief that the EMDR has the ability to also activate these glands, which have, as I said, certain chemicals, certain hormones, which create certain peptides, which tells the body information. And they also have crystals. Certain crystals exist in there as well. And that is how we receive, download information from what's called the universal mind. So it's literally like our downloading access point.
Yeah, software.
Yes.
Or hardware, you can say. It's literally hardware.
Thank you. Yeah. So just speaking honestly here, I have witnessed a lot of my clients receive direct communication from their loved ones once you can open up those portals. Sometimes, however, it's not a direct communication from the loved one, but it is a deep sense of knowingness or peace that comes with being connected to oneness. It's so beautiful. Our capacity not only bravely move through grief, to be with sadness, to actually open up these natural, I'll call them doorways, to actually receive connection and information from our loved ones. We're built with the same capacity and sensitivity, and we just need an environment that is safe enough and supportive enough, and we need enough trust in ourselves, in our capacity, and in our love with our loved ones that we can receive whatever those messages and connections, whatever's meant for us will come through. And I've seen it time and time again.
My question is, Andrea, from what you've said and beautifully explained, thank you. It is a felt sense. You're right. It's very hard to explain because I guess everyone's going to experience it in
Yes.
different ways. Is it a story we are telling ourselves, or is it really happening? And everything that you explained, Andrea, thank you, because it does validate a lot of the emotions and feelings that I experience with my maternal grandmother. But I think my question to you now is, especially for the listeners and my skeptic mind, is it a story that I'm making up in my head, or is it really happening? Is there scientific evidence that it's really happening?
So we all have a skeptic, and that's okay. I wouldn't try to convince your skeptic of anything. Usually, the skeptical mind is there to protect us from things that don't make sense or that are not for us. So we can just honor it for what it is, a nice protector part. But you also get to decide what's true for you, right? It's not the decider of what's true for you. You get to decide that. Scientific evidence, I look to the fact that there's a lot of research done around near death experiences and people talking about what their experiences have been when they're on the other side, so to speak. You can't deny from all that evidence that there isn't something beyond the physical. And what that is, marinate that in that yourself and come to your own conclusions. I just think it's also partly how we're programmed though. I think about the fact that if we
Mm-hmm.
really all were tuned into our what you might call your superhuman abilities, which we're all built with, what kind of population would that create? And that would be, I think, somewhat threatening to certain forces that be, because we wouldn't need to be relying on other people to tell us what is true. So I understand that it's okay to be skeptical. I understand the skeptical mind. It has a role to play. But I also think that the soul wants to experience what it wants to experience. And communicating with loved ones might be part of that for you, it might not be.
Beautiful. And sometimes you just don't have to make sense of it. As far as you're feeling the presence and you know that the memories are still very much present of your loved one, it doesn't matter how it shows up, but it shows up just so you know that that presence is still around you beyond the 3D. So there is a world beyond the 3D that we are not aware of. We all are built with the superpowers, but also I think our logical mind prevents us from exploring those superpowers a little bit. I'm going to ask you a very controversial question. And I say controversial because there's still, I think, studies ongoing and of afterlife and reincarnations, etc. And I come from a Hindu background, so we do believe in incarnations, but again, it's not scientifically proven yet, right? So there are a lot of discussions, yay and nay, and my husband and I always have great discussions around this topic because he doesn't think that there is anything that exists beyond this life. So, do you think that we carry DNA imprints from our previous life of grief? And so sometimes you experience grief that absolutely doesn't make any sense with the current world and the present world that you're living in, but you still go through it. Do you think that could be from your past life? And that's passed on through your own DNA imprints.
Great question. We do know from epigenetic science that we can be affected by traumas, for example, which would include grief, as we talked about before, of our ancestors. So yes, in that way, we can carry certain information in our DNA. Our DNA is an information-based system, from what I understand.
I think I asked the question incorrectly. So DNA imprints are from ancestors, you're right, because that gets
Mhm.
passed on. But also, is there grief that we can carry our past lives?
It's such a fun thing to think about. There is a lot of research on children, for example, who do have memories of their previous lives and who have emotional responses based on these stories that they carry into these new lives. My spiritual teachers have taught me that new souls, babies and young children, are closer to the veil, so to speak, right? So they're more in touch with
Mm.
information on the other side, or whatever you want to call that, until we reach roughly the age of 7. And then our third eye tends to start to close because we need to focus on this life and really gain the teachings and the learnings from this life and this identity creation of self in this world. That's one story. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that there's no such thing really truly as time. So therefore, past lives really could just be other lives happening at the same time. Another way of looking at it, yeah,
Multiverse.
exactly. Another way, like all the infinite possibilities and all the infinite used. Like, why
Yeah.
wouldn't there be? We know that from quantum physics, that's a truth. And then
Mhm.
another way of looking at it is an input and an output coming from the collective and from the larger universal mind. So sometimes we experience, not just sometimes, we're really all tuned into the experience of all of humanity. And we feel, if you're really in tune with that, you will be feeling grief because, of course, there's a lot of suffering and tragedy on this planet. There's also a lot of beautiful things,
Mhm.
but there's definitely always something to be grieving for. It
Mhm.
could be functional for the collective, for those of us who are available emotionally to process grief in general, because also what we learn as individuals gets uploaded into the collective as well. It goes two ways. We're all contributing, whether we realize it or not, to the collective, to the larger, to source, to consciousness. So there's many ways of how to answer that question.
I think you gave enough for me, the listeners, to just take it away and think and spark a little bit of their own imagination around this topic. And who knows, probably soon we're going to have scientific proven methods where we can access and understand this
Yeah,
better. Thank
you're
you,
welcome.
Andrea. Such a good conversation. And honestly, I say good, and I know grief is not an easy topic. It is a very profound experience for us human beings to go through. Not easy ever to go through grief, and the work that you do is much needed in this world. And considering the macroeconomics and everything that's happening in the world today, the wars, the divide, the trade wars that we're experiencing, the loss of lives across the world, the natural disasters, some of those tools that is so easy for us to implement in our daily lives, just the tapping and then the havening and then the breath work with your left hand on your heart, your right hand on the belly. I think those are just so easy to do, even when you're on your Zoom calls and team calls. Thank you again, Andrea. You bring so much wisdom, and I am again so honored that you agreed to do the second episode with me. And I know we're going to do many more because you are on this quest to learn more and more about helping us lead a better life. And I again appreciate you, and I love that you're part of my life. And you've helped a lot of people, and I know you want to continue doing this. So, if any of you want to connect with Andrea, you can go to her website www.andreasketch.com. You can discover two powerful tools that she generously given us in the last episode, and you can access that at www.andreasketch.com/gifts. And if you're experiencing loss or a major life transition, I hope today's episode offered understanding and a sense of hope. Remember, grief is not a weakness, it's evidence of how deeply we care, how much we were loved, and how much we've loved, and how much we've grown. And please drop in comments on what you learned from this episode, what resonated with you, and please share it with your friends and family as well. Don't forget to subscribe to the Life Vision Lab podcast for more conversations like this, again, to bring in clarity, healing, and living in alignment. Until next time, take care of yourselves. You're not alone on this journey. I am with you.